Hey guys, long time no see. Apologies for not creating videos for quite some time now. Like obviously not too long, but still I didn't create like videos I think for a week or something. So I'll definitely be resuming the videos again. Today we'll be creating tables for our design system, and obviously those tables would be responsive. Like that's obviously no big deal, and it's very easy to do. But to create a truly ideal table, like probably close to an ideal table, we need to create its base components, like I do with most of the stuff that I create, right? So let's just go ahead and actually look at the structure of a table and see how it looks. So here on Google, like I just searched table design UI, and I'm just like searching for tables. And as you can see, we have this table, we have a header here, and then let's say we have another table, we have some header here, and then we have, obviously these are much more complicated tables, like where we definitely don't want to create like too complicated of a table. I think a table like this probably where we have a header, which is like the name, version, supplier, description, date, or whatever that, and then we have a row. So by default, what we need to do is we need to create, let's say, a table header component. So let's just go ahead and actually, I'm gonna just manually drag a frame here, and I'm going to go to my neutral colors. I'm going to say this is going to be neutral 100 or maybe 200 or something. Oh, sorry, neutral 20, I mean. Yeah, I think neutral 20 is fine. I just want to make it like really light. We can also make it dark as well. So imagine that this is our table header. So I'm going to write some table header cell. Let's just go ahead and write that in. I'm also going to obviously choose the body color for this. Let's just go ahead and actually center it. And let's see what size we're using for this. So obviously we don't want to use the heading size, right? We should ideally start with the semi-bold base size. So obviously now we can see that our header that we created was actually quite big, so we don't need to concern ourselves with that. But let's just go ahead and actually choose a default size. So I'm going to say I already created this, I already made this an auto layout. I'm going to say that this table is going to be, let's say, 36 pixels in height because we're following the 4-pixel grid system. I'm going to ungroup this particular thing, and this is going to be our table cell. I'm again going to go ahead, table header cell, and we're just going to go ahead and make this a component. So I'm going to say table header cell, or we can also say table/table. Well, maybe table header cell is fine. So this is going to be our table header cell component. We also need an arrow minus down or angle minus down font or icon. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say that I'm going to detach this, and I'm going to choose my font awesome. I can also do that, but obviously since we already have our icons, I'm going to say down, and we already have our down icons coming from the hero icon library. So now that we have that, as you can see, this is coming from the local components that we created, the icons. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say that this is going to be, let's say, 16 pixels. And the spacing in between these can be 8, just to be consistent with our 4-pixel grid. So now that we have that done, let's just go ahead and actually see if this looks good. If we just zoom out a bit, I think this can actually be slightly taller. So I'm going to make it 40 instead of 36. And now that we've done that, I'm also going to give a 16 pixel spacing on the left and the right. The reason why my spacing on the top and the bottom is not affecting the height of this is because I've manually fixed the height of the table cell element, and obviously now it just keeps everything in center because I also have it center aligned, like the content center aligned vertically. So now this is our table header cell component. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say we also need a similar component for the table body cell. So now this is going to be our table body cell. Let's just go ahead and call it that, and ungroup it, detach it, and then say table body cell. We don't need the icon here. Let me see if we have any specific reason for having the icon. Well, I can't really think of any reason, so I'm going to keep the icon just in case we need it in the future, but this is what we have. So these are our two components. We can also go ahead and say table cell and then have a type of body, and then we can similarly go here and say table cell, and this is the header, or the TH we can also call it, right? So here are our base components that we're going to use. Now as far as the table header is concerned, we're just going to go ahead and we're going to create an auto layout here, and we can have as many header elements as we want here. I'm also going to give a 1 pixel spacing, as you can see, in between them, just to differentiate between the elements. And now we can go ahead and we can just copy some data from any of the tables, right? I think this one probably looks fine. So let's just go ahead and copy this. I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it here just as a reference. And we have the ID, we have the shipping date, or I don't know, shipping number. So let's just go ahead and say this is our ID, this is our shipping number, and then we have status, customer, email, country. So okay, status, customer, email, and then country. And let's say if we need anything else, so we have the source and then we have the order type. But I think this should be sufficient for our purposes. So let's just go ahead and actually keep it at that. One thing we also want to do here in particular is we can also create another variant where the icon is hidden. So I'm going to say add new property, and then I'm going to say icon write. So icon write by default can be on, and then we're going to create another variant here, and I'm going to say icon write off. And here we're just going to go ahead and hide the icon. So I can go ahead and press enter, and I can say icon write off, and as you can see, all of the icons are now off. I can just make it on one particular one if we want, right? So that is something that we can do. And now let's just go ahead and actually make those responsive. Now, as you can see, if I'm actually, let me just go ahead and rename this. This is our table header. As you can see, if I'm like resizing it, nothing is happening because our table cells aren't like, they're just hug content, they aren't filling the container. So I'm going to say that I want you to fill the container, and now as you can see, everything is responsive. So that is exactly what I wanted, but I want to say that the ID doesn't necessarily need to span completely because the IDs are usually very small, so they can remain at a particular fixed width. So we can do that as well. So now that we have the table header done, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to duplicate it just at the bottom. Going to create an auto layout saying table. So this is going to be our table, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to duplicate. I can go ahead and duplicate, but I'm going to just press enter, and I'm going to say this is going to be our. So I think I made a mistake here. So this is not the header, this is actually the body. And similarly, this is not the body, this is the header. So let's just go ahead and rename that. Minor mistake done. So now I'm just going to say that this is going to be our body part, right? So now that we have this body part, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to resize it exactly the way it was resized here. So that's done. And everything else should be fill container, which it is. So that's cool. Now I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to duplicate all of these things. So as you can see, we have our table created. I also think we can go ahead and actually have a checkbox on the left because that is something that a lot of people do. So for that, what I can say is I can create another property here for my variants or my table cell element. And I'm going to say whether the checkbox, I'm going to write a checkbox here. I'm going to say it's going to be off by default. And let's just go ahead and actually duplicate this table header. In this case, the checkbox is going to be on. And here we basically are just going to copy our checkbox from one of the other files that we have created. So here we have our checkbox. In this particular case, I'm just going to go to our checkbox style here. As you can see here, I'm just going to go ahead and reduce the opacity. I don't know why I enabled the opacity here. So I'm going to reduce them. I'm going to go back. And here we have our checkbox element. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to say similarly, this is going to be on, but this is going to be our body, is going to be for our body style, and the background here is going to be white. So now that we have that done, we can just say that this is going to be our checkbox enabled. And as you can see, we have the checkbox here. I can go ahead and I can say this can also be a checkbox, and we have a checkbox there as well. I think the checkbox, however, can be slightly smaller in size if you want. So we can go ahead and we can just resize it. So I can say 16 and it can be smaller for our particular use case. And as you can see, if I resize it or if I change the states, it's also respecting the size. So we can also do that. But the ideal way of doing it would be to actually go ahead and create some new variants here. So I have a size variant here, which I already created, which is like 20, 24, and then 32. But I think I could have probably just created a 16 pixel variant. But for now, I'm not going to do that, but just something to keep in mind for the future. So now that I have that done, I'm going to go ahead and I can delete all of these, and I can go ahead and see why they're not resizing, because the inner elements were not fill container. So now everything is resizing and it looks good. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to duplicate these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And now that we have that done, we can just create it as, mark it as a component. And we can use the content reel plugin to actually go ahead and fill a bunch of this content. I can say I want to choose an ID. And if I choose an ID, it's going to again show me some text dummy data that I can use as an ID for my table here. So here we have our ID numbers. I can just go ahead and fill them in. Similarly for the shipping, let's just go ahead and choose our shipping number. Let's just use these. And for some reason it's saying ID, which I don't really like. So I'm going to choose another one which probably has a smaller ID. So let's just see if we have, let's just choose numbers instead of an ID, because I think IDs are much smaller than, let's say, larger numbers. So I'm just going to choose a number here. And once we get some properties that are much smaller like this should work. Now for the status, what we can do is we can add our statuses. So ideally, we should use labels as our statuses, but since we don't have labels created yet in our design system, I'm just going to choose the inactive, active, so on and so forth that we have. For the customer, we can go ahead and search for customer. And as you can see, we can get some customers here as well, which I'm just going to go ahead and use for our table. So there you go. And for the email, let's just go ahead and choose our email as well. And then we're going to do the same for the country. So here we have some emails. I filled them up. And now for the country, let's just go ahead and pick a country. So this should probably be fine. Okay, so this is cool. So now as you can see, there is some minor issue where the status column is obviously fixed, right? So we don't need to scale it a bit. Obviously, some of the other ones can still be filled because those are slightly larger. So since our shipping number isn't really going to be that long, we can make this one fixed and then the other ones obviously dynamic. So I can go ahead and I can select, let's just go ahead and actually see what the width is. So width is 112. Let's just go ahead and select all of these. So there you go. We have all of these selected. And let's just go ahead and first of all say that it's going to be a fixed width and 112. So that's done. Similarly, the status shouldn't be that big either. So let's just go ahead and make this 112 as well, just to be consistent. And here we have our elements selected. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give it 112 as well. And then we have some of our emails, some of our customers, which probably is fine. Our country can also be slightly smaller. I think it's much bigger here. And we can also try making it 112 if it's not too small. And similarly here, let's just go ahead and select this, this, and this, and let's make it 112. So I think that's probably fine, though some countries can be larger. So I can go ahead and instead make this 160 just to be fair. And here we have our table created. We can also make our customer fixed if we want, but I think this is fine. One other thing that I wanted to do is I don't want this to be semi-bold for the rows. And this is exactly why this is beneficial. Having something like this base component is beneficial, because if you didn't create that, you would have to go ahead and do that individually. But now I can do that by selecting one particular element. I also think that this can be much smaller. So we can go ahead and we can say that this is going to be slightly reduced in size, maybe something like this. Or maybe it can be full container, it doesn't matter. So now as you can see, these both columns are responsive while the other ones are more fixed. So that's done. And now this is our table component that's already created. What we can do is, if we know that there are going to be a certain number of tables that we're going to actually use, we can say, I want to go ahead and I want to create some variants. In this variants thing, I'm going to say that this is going to be, I don't know, 10 rows. This can be 5 rows, and then we can have one for 15 rows. And once we have that done, what we can do is we can just go ahead and never mind. There's one mistake that I've done that I need to go ahead and change, and that is that this should be a table row. all of these should be rows, right? So I didn't rename it, and that's not really that big of a deal, but you should definitely go ahead and rename this. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to say number of rows. So whether we have 5 rows, whether we have 3 rows, 10 rows, or 15 rows, I'm going to create an auto layout here and say 10. In this 10 case, we are just going to go ahead and duplicate all of these rows. As you can see, now these are 10. And then we're just going to go ahead and duplicate them. We're going to say, well, maybe 3, 5, 10 is fine. So let's just go ahead and make it 3, 5, 10. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to basically just duplicate this above one and say 3, just move it up and remove 2 of them. So now here we have our component created, and we can just use it anywhere. We just go here and we can drag it, and we can say whether we want like 3 rows, 5 rows, 10 rows. One thing obviously that you should do is you should move 3 at the beginning, and that should be it. One other thing that I would like to do is I would like to create another variant or another variation of my table that can be dark, right? So I'm going to say I want to add a new property here, and I want to choose whether this thing is going to be dark. So by default, the dark is going to be off, but I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to select all of these 3 things, and I'm just going to move them here, and I'm going to say dark is going to be on. In this particular case, what I want to say is the dark can actually be some darker color like this, and obviously the elements that are sitting inside of it, which were body, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say the body is going to be white now. So now that I have that done, as you can see, if I want, I can just press enter and I can say all of these should be dark. And that's going to give me a darker table. Similarly, or a darker table header, right? What I can do is, if I want to control all of that within the single table component, I can go ahead and I can basically just, first of all, enlarge it. I can go ahead and enlarge this whole page as well, so I can have the darker variation on the right. I can go ahead, then I can basically just copy all of these. And first of all, I obviously need to remove the auto layout. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this because I only did that for my styling. Now here I have, well, never mind. One thing that I forgot to do is I forgot to add a new property here. So I'm going to add a new property, whether this is going to be dark. And I'm going to say the dark is going to be off by default. And if you want to use a dark header, I'm going to say dark on. And there's one other thing that we can do is we can allow users to choose a darker header as well as a darker body. So I'm going to say this is dark header, whether this should be a dark header. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to choose all of the headers I have here. I'm going to press enter and I'm going to say all of these should be dark. I'm going to press Shift enter to select the larger container, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say the background for this header should be slightly less because the border now should be much more subtle instead of, let's say, obviously being white. So now that I have that done, like that's done, this icon obviously wasn't dark as well, so I'm going to say this should be white. So in this case, as you can see, we have that done. Let's just go ahead and actually make another variant for our body style as well, which should be dark as well. So I'm going to say this is going to be dark on, and we can go ahead and we can change the color here. I'm going to say the color for this particular thing should be slightly lighter than the above one, and obviously the text can be white. So let's just see how that looks. So now that we have this done, we have the dark header done. I'm going to go ahead and create a new property, dark body. In this dark body case, we obviously want to go ahead and choose and just make the body portion of it darker. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to basically duplicate this here. I'm going to select all the rows now, and I'm going to say dark body on. I'm going to select all of the rows here, and let's just go ahead and first of all like collapse everything, then select all of these, press enter. I'm going to go ahead and deselect the table header by pressing the command key. I'm going to again press enter. This has all of the rows selected now, the body cell selected now, and I'm going to say these are going to be dark. So now this just indicates what happens when the rows are dark. So I'm going to press Command Z, I'm going to press Shift Enter, and here we also want to go ahead and say the fill for this whole thing should be neutral, and this should be Neutral, maybe 200, so we don't have a very large or dynamic separation in between them. This looks much subtle. And now let's just go ahead and basically duplicate this whole thing here. And instead say, in this case, obviously in this case, everything is going to be dark. So the dark header is going to be dark. The dark body is also going to be dark. And now we're going to go ahead and choose our headers here. So here we have both of our headers selected. I'm going to press enter and I'm going to choose dark. And similarly here that I use the 9 N500 background here. I'm going to say that I want to have the N500 background for the table headers here as well. So the table header here, and then the table header here, and then the table header here. So let's just go ahead and give it a fill, N500. So here we have both of our dark variations created. Now, obviously, the benefit of using the thing that we created here is if you want to make it slightly more darker, which I think we can go ahead and just directly make it dark from the original component. And as you can see, we have the darker tables here. One other thing I want to do for all of these tables, not just one, for all of these tables, I want to clip the content and I want to say that I want to add a border radius of 4 pixels. So it's a bit more roundy on the edges. So now as you can see, if I drag my component here, we have the dark body. Let's just go ahead and configure that. I'm going to go here. I'm going to say the dark body is going to be off by default and then on. So if I go here now, if I want the dark body on, I can keep it on. If I want it off, I can keep it off. I can make this header dark and light as well. That's disconnected. I can choose the number of rows. I can again choose whether the body should be dark, whether the header should be dark, and all of that should be possible. And obviously these tables, especially the rows in the middle, should be responsive. So that also works. Everything looks good. And I think that's going to be pretty much it for this video. Do subscribe to hit the bell icon. If there are any questions on these tables, definitely let me know and I can cover those in the comments. So I'll see you later. Bye.